G'day. Welcome to Lunch Money. You are live with your online and social media home for special situations, workouts, and capital raising professionals. My name is Nick Samios. I'm the fund manager and director here at Hermes Capital, and I am your Lunch Money live stream and podcast host. So a very warm welcome to our live viewers and to anyone who may be watching us on replay or listening to our podcast. Today, I'm really very excited about today's show. We are going to be talking about B2B sales and marketing. And anyone that knows me personally knows that sales and marketing is a passion of mine. One of the things I just love doing is training a new salesperson, a new BDM. I guess I'm getting to that stage now. You can see I've got a few grey hairs. I'm becoming that old sales dog. And so I'm very, very excited to have James Tuckerman on today. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff, developments and trends and what's new and happening in the world of B2B. Before we start, I'll do the usual housekeeping. I'll ask you to share, like, or subscribe to our humble podcast here. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or you might be listening to us on Apple podcasts. If you're listening to us there, why don't you give us a 5-star rating? That'd be awesome. The other thing I'd like to remind you is if you're watching live, any comments or questions, we pick the best ones and we send you this Lunch Money mug. We have a new batch of Lunch Money mugs, and they get dispatched to our live viewers who are good enough to ask us a question. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our special guest today. And our special guest is James Tuckerman. G'day, James. How are you?
Hello. I'm just trying to think about what type of sales dog you are. Are you a Labrador?
You're going to do that one. I'm not sure.
I think you're a Basset Hound.
A Basset Hound? Oh, no, I'm not sure I want to be a Basset Hound. You think so?
No, they're good. They're very patient and they follow up. And
oh, gee, I don't know. But Ari Gold is kind of my hero. I mean, one of these days I want to buy one of my competitors and go in there with a paintball gun.
Maybe you are a pit bull.
I don't know. I probably want to be. I'm probably a wannabe. Listen, James, I've got your LinkedIn profile here. You're the founder of Anthill Magazine. You're the co-founder of B2B School. You're the co-creator at B2B Dash. And yes, I have connected with you. You've got Want to Connect here. I really think of you as a thought leader. I guess. If you'd asked me, do the Rorschach test, here's James Tuckerman. A month or two ago, I would have thought of you as startups in particular, because you were very active in that sort of startup and entrepreneurship space. I guess you're putting a more of a B2B flavor on that now. I mean, what is it that keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, I'm wearing a new hat. You can see, it's actually, I got some sad news today. Edward de Bono has passed away, speaking of hats. He was the person who popularized the idea of wearing different hats. But for a good decade, which was my first 10 years living the life as a business owner / entrepreneur, I was the founder of a business magazine called Anthill Magazine. And a lot of Australians that were in the startup or entrepreneurship space about 10 years ago would be quite familiar with Anthill Magazine. I launched it from my parents' spare bedroom. We grew it to be a market leader. I was named Best Small Publisher in Australia twice. And I launched that business because I wanted to encourage Australians to be more entrepreneurial and foster a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation in Australia. And I'd like to think that my little humble magazine did make a dent at that time. Then, of course, the GFC swung around. It was the perfect storm for print magazine publishers. Steve Jobs invented launched the first popular iPad. Google decided to show people that advertising could be measurable. And then magazines began to drop like flies. We were one of the first movers to go 100% digital. And that was our focus for another bunch of years, 5 years print, 5 years digital. And then at some point we shifted into training and consulting and technology development. And the more I moved into that space, the more I discovered how useful some of my skills were for people in a B2B space. So we rebranded about 2 and a bit years ago to the B2B School. And then that became the platform for B2B Dash, and as part of the B2B group. Can you notice a theme?
Yeah.
And what's been keeping me busy? The B2B Summit, the Sales and Marketing Summit, which we just finished up on. Yeah.
And that B2B Summit, are people able to, if we promote that in our LinkedIn, are they able to go and sort of buy it in retrospect, or?
I'll tell you what we're doing right now is we're in the process of trying to figure out a way to make it evergreen. So that means that, Nick, you could sign up tomorrow and the summit would kick off for you, say, in 14 days' time, which means that you could still get access to, I think we've got 16 speakers within the summit, some really amazing names if you're interested in B2B, attacking a whole bunch of really important topics. We're trying to find a way to make that freely available to anyone who's interested, but then if they want to buy the recordings, they can buy the recordings too.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, your YouTube channel is amazing as well. I mean, I guess you've probably been a little bit like me, and you find there are amazing people out there, and most people are happy to to jump on a YouTube and share their wisdom. I get people saying to me, how do you know all these people? Well, I didn't know you, James, but I mean, obviously, actually, you reached out and said who watches YouTube, and I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or Facebook or somewhere. I thought that was fascinating, but the whole B2B thing. It's funny, I started out at AGC selling, and I did my first sales training was a thing called PSS something, professional PSS. It was professional sales selling, I think it was, and it was the industry standard, of how to make a sales call and how to conduct yourself through a meeting and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, face to face is still very important. But I guess B2B has evolved a lot. But before I go into that, I'm just curious. I mean, a lot of what we do and a lot of what a lot of what our audience does is corporate restructuring, which is obviously the business has got into trouble. It's stubbed its toe, as one of my clients once said, and it really needs to sort of start again, I suppose. But there are a lot of parallels, I think, between a startup and a turnaround. I mean, have you ever sort of applied your mind to that?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. I mean, like if you speak to a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've got to know, and I'm very privileged to call friends over the years, and I've worked with and met with and interviewed a lot of amazing people at the highest levels of entrepreneurship, and it's never an easy ride. And if you look at all their businesses, there are going to be multiple pivots. So in my world, I was a print magazine. I raised capital. The GFC went and gazumped that. Then we had to pivot, and we had to become a digital business. Online media. Then, of course, online media became harder and harder to make a buck in online media. So we pivoted to online training and consulting, and then we pivoted again to focus on a very narrow niche, or niche as the Americans say, a vertical, and then branched out into technology development. So you look at anyone in an innovative industry or a business, or even someone that's just been around the block for a while, there are going to be times of transition, and they're going to be required to pivot. I think it's just part and parcel of doing it. And at the beginning of last year, when everyone went a little bit bonkers because of COVID and the shopping centers were cleared out of toilet paper, I watched people around me having these mental and emotional breakdowns within their business. And all I could think of was, I think this is the third time I've had the carpet ripped out from underneath me. I think it's part and parcel of business. And I think that if you can survive, I don't know, if you can survive one bombing, like in the London Blitz, if you can survive that one bombing, you pretty much feel invincible and you can get through the next one. So I think that there's definite parallels.
Well, I guess you mentioned the London Blitz. I think, it was Winston Churchill, I think, said, when the going gets tough, keep going. I mean, I guess in the startup space, there's a lot of, cheerleading and a lot of really positive stuff. But of course, it does get tough. I mean, it's not all beer and Skittles. I think, people can can fail. It doesn't mean they fail forever, but the business can fail. I've always said that if people claim that they know what small business is all about, you see the banks advertise on TV, we get small business. And I've always thought, my saying is, when you've had to dip into your kids' school fee fund to pay payroll this week, then you know what small business is all about. But so I guess what you're saying is that you acknowledge that it is a tough road, and there's all sorts of twists and turns along the way.
I think maybe if it's a larger business and you're going through what you call a special situation or a stub of the toe or a transitional situation, I guess if it's a larger organization rather than a startup, I guess it just might feel that little bit more public. And I think that there makes it seem a little bit more scary and a little bit harder. Whereas the reality is that if you speak to, most business owners, just about everyone's been to the wall at least once. It's like those funny things that you make some mild, quiet confession to a good friend, and you say, "Oh yeah, my dad always had a problem with alcohol," right? And you think that you're the only one. And then you probably discover that, 3 out of 5 Australian kids grew up with one parent that had a complicated relationship with alcohol. When it comes to this business stuff, we all go through it. It's it's the Muhammad Ali quote. It's not how hard you hit, it's how fast you can get. Was it? It's not how hard the hit, it's how fast you get back up. Something like that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's look, there's plenty of good boxing metaphors in there, I'm sure. I've always said that, for a football team to win a flag or a grand final trophy, you need to know the smell of the canvas. You need to have taken a knock and got down before you can really win. What in the startup space, and then I really want to get into B2B, but in the startup space, what do you think are the big challenges at the moment, and how have those challenges changed? Like at the moment, there is so much cash around. With the governments printing money like crazy, the US is spending trillions. There was a thing in the Wall Street Journal yesterday where banks are saying to their business customers, we don't want your deposits. So there's lots of money. There's funds starting up all the time. What are the challenges in startup world at the moment, do you think?
It's just got to be how easy it is. Now, that sounds crazy that it's a challenge, because when I started Anthill Magazine 18 years ago, it was expensive. And I was doing things that were real bootstrapping strategies at the time, but it was still expensive. Every edition of the magazine was going to set me back $100,000, which means that if I wanted to get a magazine out, I had to make sure that I was generating $100,000, because I didn't come from family wealth or have a big war chest to run with. Now you look at the people that have come since then. And there's this fairly remarkable young man called Nathan Chan, and he runs a business called Founder, which kicked off as a digital entrepreneur magazine, FOUNDR. And when he started, he invited me out for lunch, and the cheapskate took me to Nando's. But he was was the typical cash-strapped entrepreneur. Now he's doing multiple 7 figures. And he's done it in a remarkably short amount of time, because he didn't have to launch. I had to raise venture capital, not venture capital, something like seed capital. After about, I think, the 3rd or 4th edition, I went out and raised money. It was a complex exercise. Now you have a look at the cost of entry, and you throw in those elements like the opportunity to get a redundancy package. So I know, for example, at the moment, I think that the Victorian state government is about to roll something out called job skills, and they're paying people $3,000 to spend on their education so that they can become more resilient in a changing landscape and workforce and start their own business. $3,000, you could start a business these days. You can start a business with less than $1,000. So I think that the bigger challenge is not to do with access to capital. There is definitely a valley of death, which means that it's really easy to get started. It's probably difficult to raise that 300,000 to 2 million, and then it's easy again. So there's definitely, when it comes to raising capital, there's this valley of death, which is really, really difficult to get out of. But I think that the biggest challenge is two challenges, I think. One is it is so easy. And the other thing is the absolute extreme proliferation of options. So it's really hard to sometimes sort through all the different voices that are out there and work out what set of steps are going to get you to your destination in the least amount of time for the least amount of cost, because the options are so vast.
Most of the, I mean, you're obviously still deeply plugged into the startup community. I mean, are most of the startups that you see, people reinventing the wheel or building a better mousetrap, or are they just better ways of, delivering?
It hasn't changed in 20 years. It really is. You've got crazy entrepreneurial types that unfortunately think that they have created something that nobody's ever done before. Yep. Unfortunately, there's just still a ton of them out there, when if they spent 5, 10, 15 minutes on Google, they could discover that there's a bunch of different ones out there. It hasn't changed. There's a gazillion of people like that. If you've got a brand new idea and it's a wild brand new idea, please Google it. Talk to as many friends as possible. I meet people at networking events, or I used to when we were allowed to go out and meet people at networking events. And I'd say, tell me about your idea. And they'd say, I won't tell you unless you sign an NDA. And I might say, I met you 3 years ago at a networking event and you said the same thing. Yeah. How's it going? And then they tell you and you go, I can name 4 companies that are doing that right now.
Yeah.
So that hasn't changed at all. Unfortunately, in Australia, it's really hard to launch something that is a genuine unicorn. We've had some great stories like Canva and Atlassian, and then there's some other ones like 99 Designs and a whole bunch of there's quite a few, but no one's going to back that type of company in Australia until it's got a fairly consistent MRR, which is monthly recurring revenue. So B2B-.io is only 14 months old, young, and we're growing by 14.6% MRR every month. Now, if we were in another country, we probably would have raised money a year ago just off the pure potential. But in Australia, you have to get to a certain level before people are going to take you a little bit more seriously. But I think that the real intelligent money, or the real intelligent startup entrepreneurial people, they are the ones that look at something that everybody else is possibly already doing, and then they just do it better. So, if I was to make this really old school, you go to the suburban shopping strip where you've got all the shops, and if one of them is a grubby old pizza shop that hasn't changed in 30 years, sounds really harsh when I say it this way.
Yeah.
You open up a better, modern, cutting-edge pizza shop 3 shops down, and you'll kill it, because the first one tells you that there's demand despite selling a crap product.
Well, if 2 years ago I'd said to you, James, I want you to put everything you've got on this great idea I have. It's a lay-by business. Except instead of lay-buying, you're going to walk out of the store with the goods. And I'm going to call it buy now, pay later, just to make it sexy.
I know.
You'd say, well, get out of here. That's ridiculous. Their share price isn't quite what it used to be, but
it's still astonishing. Anything in fintech right now, it's pretty amazing, and what is amazing is that these fintech companies, a lot of them, the revenue is not huge, the profit is quite unimpressive, but the amount of money under management is so huge that it gives them these incredible valuations.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just that. I think it's all, you're right, but I think also if you're in the space where the hot money is, where all the funds want to invest in, over Christmas I did a little bit of training on M&A, just to brush up, and one of the things I talked about the multiple. And just by redefining your business, you can all of a sudden, if you've gone from being one thing, and let's say now you're a fintech, well, the multiples on that go from one thing to the next. Listen, I wanted to get to specifically on the B2B thing, and a lot of our audience, they're accountants. And they're normally in the restructuring space. So, insolvency people, maybe safe harbor. We've had on this show, for example, we've had Richard Hughes, who was one of the main people at Deloitte behind Virgin. And we've had, those sorts of people, the people that are in our audience, not necessarily the guys just doing the big jobs, but the ones that are doing small restructures as well. And some of them might be younger professionals that have just got their ticket, as they say. And what everybody needs, what every firm needs, is the rainmaker. It's one thing to have all the people who are really knowledgeably, they know how to do a restructure, they know all the tips and tricks, but if they can't win the business, and if they can't bag the elephant, or whatever you want to say, it doesn't matter, because brains are cheap, as they say. Yeah. It's being able to. So what are the sort of people that what are your clientele generally? What do they look like? Are they professional services or?
Well, first, you made me think of a mnemonic that I learned. I studied law. I was going to be a lawyer. So I did a law degree at the University of Melbourne. Then I stumbled into PR, and I worked in all these big PR advertising agencies for a couple of years before I started the magazine. But and you've probably heard this, but within every organization of that structure, there are finders, minders, and grinders. Is that right? Grinders, minders, and finders. Right. And the grinders do all the work, get paid the least. The minders look after the clients, do less, get paid a bit more. And the finders do almost no work and get paid the most. And they are what did you call them? The elephant hunters or something?
Well, the rainmakers. Bagging the elephant, I think, is a Wall Street term. I think when Buddy Fox goes after Michael Douglas and he bags the elephant.
There you go. Well, what I would say is that the money's always been in the finders, and it doesn't matter whether you're running your own business and you're the key principal finder, or you work with another organization, and you acknowledge that if you can elevate yourself and become the finder, you become more valuable to the organization that you're in. The biggest, the biggest thing that we're seeing is. When we talk about B2B sales and marketing, if this was 20 years ago, the options were extremely limited and outrageously obvious. So from a marketing perspective, you would have this pie, and you'd like, we're going to spend this bit on television, and this bit on radio, and this bit on direct mail, and this bit on entertainment and functions and events. And then when it came to sales, you would have your sales director, a couple, business development managers, a couple SDRs, maybe sales development reps, and most of the time to get the work, you'd hit the phone, or once again you'd go to the networking event. You'd be seeking out referrals from your network, which is still very powerful. Don't get me wrong. And I think that Nick said at the beginning that that face-to-face relationships are still very, 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 very powerful. Or maybe he said that before we hit record. I'm not quite sure. But what I do know is that the pie was fairly limited, and now it seems like there are this infinite variety of ways to get leads in the door. So that's the one bit. That's the top of the funnel. That's the leads, and we've got. We've got our websites, we've got social media, we've got strategic alliances, we've got ads, and we've got podcasts. But even if you look at one thing, like a podcast, you say, well, is it a podcast, or is it a YouTube video, or is it a StreamYard live event? What the heck is it going to be? So there's all these options. Then at the bottom, and I'm trying to see what this looks like on the camera. Sorry if you're.
No, that's good. That's good.
I'm making a funnel with my hands.
It's a very good-looking funnel.
Funnel with my hands. The people at the bottom, at the pointy end, when we're talking about sales, that's been really messed with. I have this image that I use in my marketing where I'm standing next to this brick wall, and you can see that at some point someone has smashed through this brick wall, kind of like a a cartoon character, like, Fred Flintstone has bashed through the wall and has left the shape of a human. And then someone's gone and bricked it up. And in this image, I'm pointing at the door and this bricked up hole, and I'm saying this was once a door. And the reality is that so many of the ways that the mechanisms and the strategies that we used to use to grab the attention, find the whale or the elephant, grab their attention, hold their attention, build a relationship, build that trust. So many of them have just evaporated, which means that we need to find new ways.
But the other thing is that in the old days, I've just dropped my pen. In the old days, you would go and sit in front of a customer, and I always used to say, if I can get in front of the customer, I can close. You can hear some old school language there. But these days, the person that you think you've closed goes home, sits on the sofa like I do, is watching YouTube, but they're also Googling, and they just may Google and suddenly come across one of your competitors and maybe fill in an online form, or maybe something pops up on social media. I mean, that funnel is under attack at a lot more points along the funnel, I think, than ever before.
Yes, Google did a report called the 0 Moment of Truth, and they analyzed, hundreds of millions of data points across tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of websites. And they were analyzing human behavior in a whole bunch of different industries. And one of those industries is the complex sale. And that's what we have in B2B. People aren't pulling out a credit card and going tappity, tappity, tap and buying something from our website. We're not selling an e-commerce product. If we're in a complex sales environment, which is, 80, 90% of all B2B sales, it begins with a conversation. There needs to be a little bit of education and an explanation and a relationship is built. You have to demonstrate value. There might be multiple decision makers. You might have to, discuss payment arrangements. There's all sorts of different elements. But they found, and I've got to get this right, I think it was 7 hours, 11 interactions across 4 locations to close a complex sale. And that was the average. So it might only be 1 hour, and it might only be 4 interactions in one location. But then again, it could be, 30 hours across 30 locations, 30 interactions across 10 locations. That was the average, 7 hours, 11 interactions, 4 locations. And if you think about going back to the ways that we would have done things 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I can't invest 7 hours of my time to close a client. It's just not possible.
No, the payoff. Yeah, if you do a payoff calculation on that, Yeah, I mean, if it's a really big value client, I mean, obviously if the client's worth, tens, I'm not even going to say tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. If the client's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can put in your 7 hours. So what that means is that we need to engineer different ways to accelerate that process and all those different touch points. Fortunately, a lot of the ways to engineer those touch points aren't radically difficult to understand or explain or implement. The challenge that most people have is that they don't know what things to do in what order. So where should I start this process? How am I going to sequence these things together in a nice, clean way? Well, let me start. You say how to start the process. If let's say someone watching this is an accounting firm in Sydney, and they've got 4 partners, and they all want to ramp up, and they get James in, and they say, what's the low hanging fruit for you in terms of getting early wins?
Low hanging fruit is always the network. No, it's the network that you already have. So most organizations usually already have a database. If you've been around the block a few times, you're going to have a database. Even if you've been in business for only a matter of months. We had a guy called Matt Richter who went through one of our training programs, brand new business. And he said, I don't have a network. And we went, okay, well, let's just have a look at how many connections you have on LinkedIn. Let's have how many connections that you've got on Facebook. How many people do you have in your contacts in your Gmail account? Like, just think about that. Like, imagine, Nick, if you like exported all the contacts from your Gmail account right now. Could you ever guess how many contacts you'd have?
Oh, thousands. Yeah.
Thousands. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than 10,000.
Yeah.
Because I did it and I was about 15, 17,000. It was huge because I've had the same Gmail account for a very, very long time. So he did that and he exported all his contacts into a smaller database. He didn't add them to an email newsletter or do anything spammy, but he sent out what we would call a batch set of emails where you're sending out one-on-one emails to a smaller group of people, usually under 500 is what's in a typical batch, so that you don't get involved in any, dirty, black hatty, gray area stuff. You don't want to do that. And this was Matt, didn't even have a business at this time. And I got this wonderful testimonial from him. And he said, I picked up a strategic alliance partner. No, it was 2 strategic alliance partners, 1 radio interview, and 19 clients. Now I've got to go out and start my business. And that came from the network that was already under his nose. Now I speak with people and they've got massive networks, massive databases. They just don't even know what to do with it. So that's usually the low-hanging fruit. Reawakening, reigniting, reconnecting. It's often said that an existing client, signing a new client is 16 times more expensive than re-signing or selling something new to an existing client. But everybody's, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find new people. But, it's 16 times cheaper.
So if we had sort of a SWOT thing going here, we'd say, okay, well, you're seeing that as the number one opportunity. The low-hanging fruit is look at your existing network. What do you generally find is the biggest weakness in a professional services setting?
I think it's over-reliance on the staff and the key players to do all the business development work. So you go to, I could go to a small accountancy practice, mid-size, all the way up to, the big 3 or 4 or whatever they are, whatever they call themselves now. And what's your mechanism for bringing in new work? And it's sending out our staff to hand out business cards at the American Chamber of Commerce and Industry Christmas party that's happening. And that's fine. Seriously, one of your greatest assets in that type of organization is obviously going to be your staff. But first and foremost, wouldn't it help to train up those staff members so that they were better at that stuff? Even to the point of just helping them perhaps re-engineer their LinkedIn profiles as a mechanism to collect leads. So we're talking about the parallels between startup culture and bigger businesses. A startup can build a business with nothing but a landing page and a LinkedIn profile. They don't need an inexpensive $30,000 website and all this other stuff. And if you look at a larger organization, say you've got 20 staff, 30 staff, 50 staff, 100 staff, it's not hard to empower all those people and show them how they can play their bit to bring in leads without necessarily schlepping out to the local RSL club, whatever it is, all the different clubs and associations that are out there and flicking out business cards like confetti, because not everybody's well suited to that. I'm what they call an extroverted introvert.
Do you still have a business card?
I don't have a business card. I haven't had a business card in over a decade.
I do have a business card. I'm trying to find one so I can show it off to you, but I'm hoping that you'll be mildly impressed. So this is my business card. There we go there. But on the back, because we're all used to QR, right?
Yeah, there you go. Ahead of your time.
Yeah.
Do you know Antil magazine?
If you scan that,
the second last copy of Antil magazine had QR codes in it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like, no, and we got it was crazy. Anyway, story for another day. Anyway.
Well, with that QR code goes to my link tree, which has all the podcast landing page, all the podcasts and all the different sites you can watch this thing on. So look, it's interesting. Yeah, I noticed, for example, in your LinkedIn profile, you've got want to connect. That's so positive. Who doesn't want to connect?
The other thing is, just a simple thing. Imagine this. Wow, how radical! Putting your email address front and center of your LinkedIn profile. People go, I don't want to do that. Someone might take my email. and reach out to you and ask how they can spend money with you. I don't want to put my mobile in there. What if someone calls me? And they call you and they say, hey, I was checking out your LinkedIn profile. Can we meet up? Because I think that you might be able to help me. You know, they're worried that someone's going to scrape it and do something nefarious with it. But the reality is that when it comes to a tool like LinkedIn, and most people are using LinkedIn, they're either using it to get their next job, or they're using LinkedIn as a business development tool. Yet they're putting up all these barriers to stop people actually, to stop opportunities coming their way. So they're saying, I use LinkedIn as a business development tool, but I'm not going to accept any contact requests unless they're, jump through 27.
Well, it's like your mobile phone number as well. I mean, my mobile phone number's on my profile, I'm pretty sure. I mean, people, whatever.
You got to be realistic. What's the worst case scenario? Someone puts you on one of those terrible, lists where they call you at dinner time and try and sell you something. And you know what? It's already happening, and we know how to block them. We don't recognize the number. We don't answer. It's not a big deal. And if someone really wants to get to us, they get to us. It's the same with email as well too. But I think you asked the question before, where would a B2B business operator start? And I did say the easiest low-hanging fruit is usually the network that you have. If it's a larger organization, you've also got this wonderful asset, which is the staff. But I also don't want to underplay the importance of having the underpinning framework to go under that. So, for example, you could reach out to your existing network and say, hey, how are you? Do you want to spend some money with me? And if it's a very neglected database, that's like your brother-in-law that you haven't heard from in 4 years reaching out. Hey, Franco, how you doing, mate? Yeah, great. Can I borrow some money? It's unless you've got that underpinning structure where you know how you want to collect a lead, how you want to pre-qualify the lead, who you would regard as a Goldilocks client, who's not going to waste your time, having a mechanism built within the business to pre-qualify that lead, underpinning stuff.
How much of what you do in B2B school or your engagement with in consulting, I mean, how much of it goes back from sales back into differentiation, with segmenting, all that sort of, or even back into product development itself?
Well, there's 3 elements to the B2B school that we focus on, and these are 3 interlapping circles, and they seem very big picture, and that's because they are, until you get into them. And the first circle of our 3 overlapping circles is sales. The second is marketing, and the third one is scale. So when we're talking about sales, you've got to have an offer that's compelling. You need to have systems in place to elevate anticipation before you meet with a prospect. And you need to have the basic soft skills in place and mechanisms to be able to close that client. And that there is sales in a nutshell. I start with the offer because I've seen this again and again. You're talking about product and differentiation. A lot of people might have amazing, skills. They might have a whole bunch of different leads, but then they create these offers that repel clients, that are structured in a way that make it difficult for them to make a decision. It's very weird. So the offer is the most important bit in sales, having the systems and the technology to elevate anticipation, to get those 11 interactions in as quickly as possible, and then the soft skills to close. And at this day and age, there's a McKinsey report came out that said 81% of B2B buyers and sellers don't want sales and marketing practices to go back to the way that they were pre-COVID. So they actually like the idea that you are engaging with someone over Zoom to sell them a product or service. That's sales. Yeah. Then you've got marketing, which is about getting the lead. Yeah. And there's 3 elements to that. And then you've got scale. And the scale is if you can't do scale unless you've got your sales better down and your marketing better down, because scale is that wonderful point. And you know this, you meet with people and you say, oh, when did things really take off for you? And they'll say, oh, it was when we started the podcast, or it was when we started doing radio ads, or it was when we started doing webinars, or it was when I published the book. That's when things explode, and that's when you're not doing one-to-one sales. That's when you're doing one-to-many, or at least doing one-to-many enough to be able to collect the lead and warm the lead enough so that when you get them on a Zoom call or meet them face-to-face, you can often get a commitment as early as the first conversation because all the legwork's been done. So they're the three main elements.
Okay. Well, in capital raising, particularly in private equity or even the sort of early investor stage, scalability of the business and what the opportunities for scaling are always critical, aren't they? Because people don't want to invest in a business that's just going to grow incrementally. They want to know how the business is going to, grow tenfold or more.
Three magic words: predictable sales model. I mean, like, if you've got a predictable sales model, that's magical. Most professional services, most B2B business owners, operations don't have a predictable sales model. They have a whole bunch of people that do a whole lot of legwork, and they also get referrals. They rely overly heavily on referrals. Referrals are great. It means that you're doing a terrific job. It means people like you, but they're very hard to own and manage and control. So, for example, some months you'll get no referrals at all. It might be like January and February in professional services. Referrals just kind of vanish and disappear. And then there's other months where they peak. It becomes very inconsistent.
All right. Well, look, James, we're sort of up on our normal time limit. I mean, there isn't an axe, but we generally try to run about 40 minutes. So, I'll ask you any sort of closing thoughts or any advice for particularly people in professional services that are trying to win more work, and let's sort of keep it focused on that.
I'll tell you, I'll end with a slightly cryptic question for everyone who's listening or watching the video, and it pulls together some of the pieces that I've just been talking about now. But and I don't know, Nick, there's no correct answer to this question, but I'll see how you go. You've got a destination that you want to get to. What's more important, the train, the tracks, or the driver of the train? Just imagine that as it's a cryptic question. You've got a destination you want to get to, and you've got the train, the tracks, the driver of the train. In my cryptic question, you are the driver. You know where you want to go. The train itself is a metaphor for technology, and the tracks are the strategy. What do you? And by the way, I'm not sure there is a correct answer, but I'd like to hear what you think. What do you think is more important, the train, the tracks, or the driver?
Well, I guess when you put it in terms of the strategy, I saw a quote. I think it might have been a Drucker quote or someone today that said, it was on Twitter. I saw someone quoting it, that, strategy is great, but it's execution is everything. So I'm not sure where's execution fit in the metaphor?
The execution's the driver of the train. So the driver can't just sit there in his funny little hat and go choo choo, pretend to drive the train.
Who's determining where the tracks are going?
That's the driver. You know what? I don't think there is a correct answer, but the reality is that I asked the question because people often come up with the definitive answer. They say it's the tracks, because if you don't have the strategy, right, where does the driver know where they need to go? And the train itself is just a big piece of technology going nowhere fast. If you don't have the tracks, you don't have the strategy, you don't know where you're going. And I've noticed that those people, and I'm one of those people, love a good whiteboard. They love planning, not necessarily executing, as you say. There are other people that say it's the driver, which is what you said, Nick. And the drivers are usually people who are great at executing. They're very good at rolling up their sleeves and doing stuff themselves. But sometimes they leap into the doing without necessarily laying out the tracks, the strategy. And they might try and do things themselves without using the technology. Then there are people that say the train. It's all about the train, because the train's going to get you from A to B in the fastest amount of time. Me, I love the train. I mean, like, I've got B2B-.io, which allows B2B business owners to create lead gateways to collect the leads, email sequences to educate the leads. They can book the meeting, using a meeting booking form. They can pre-qualify the lead using a mini diagnostic. They can even take money from their clients rather than send out endless streams of invoices. They can take deposits up front, and they get it all on this wonderful B2B dashboard. It's an amazing tech stack that helps people. It rolls about 5 or 6 different tools into one. So they only have to use one tech tool, and they've got all their data in one place. So there are people that love the technology, and I love the technology, But however, once again, a technology like a big fat train, without the driver to actually implement it, without the tracks to tell you where you need to go. And we've all been there. We've invested in a piece of technology, not known really what we wanted to do with it, not had the desire to drive the thing. We'll also go nowhere. It's a big piece of metal sitting in someone's back garden.
Yeah.
So I asked the question, is it the driver, the train, or the tracks? And the moral of the story is that B2B sales and marketing, it's all three. That's what it is. It's about having the execution. It's about having the technology. It's about having the strategy. And not so gratuitous plug. That's what we built B2B, the B2B group to do, to help people with their strategy through B2B School, help them with their technology through b2b-.io. And then, of course, we've got our support team to help you guys and gals execute. There you go.
Well, I think B2B School looks fantastic. I can't think of anyone that's doing anything similar. And as I say, in the circles that I move in professional services, they're all highly complex sales, believe me, particularly in corporate restructuring. Every piece of the puzzle, there's advisors all over the place trying to tear the business away from you. I think that what you're doing there is fantastic. So I would encourage anyone who's watched this or listened to this to follow the links that'll be in the brief after this. James, thank you so much. I feel very privileged to have had you on my podcast today. So thank you very much for making the time.
It's been my pleasure, and it's been a ton of fun, Nick. It's great to have a conversation with someone who knows how to do this stuff well. That's you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.